So, welcome to the Regroup Podcast. This is the podcast where we interview great people doing good things in the world. Our first guest is the CEO of the Canadian Gap Year Association, Michelle Dittmer. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. Would you like to introduce yourself just a little bit more?
Sure. I am a great person doing good things. And I run the Canadian Gap Year Association. My background is in education and more specifically in experiential learning. So, giving people the opportunity to learn by doing rather than learn by textbooks. And the medium in which I have chosen to do that is through the idea of a gap year, where young people or old people choose to take a break from the well traveled path, whether that's education or career, and they put a pin in it. They push pause and they move into a year of just attempting things, experimenting, traveling, working, volunteering, just doing something different than the status quo to learn a little bit more about themselves and what their next steps in life might look like. And it's a big passion. It is a joy. It is a pleasure. And I just love the work that I do, and I want to share it with more people.
So, growing up, I was always told that taking a gap year wasn't a super good idea. Um, I was told by peers and by parents that if I took a gap year, there would be like huge educational consequences, or that I'd never go back to school. Can you sort of address some of those worries that students might have?
100%. So that's a very common misconception. And the research actually proves quite the opposite, which is interesting. So the Gap Year Association in the US did a huge study about that, and they compared people who took a gap year to people who didn't take a gap year. And what they found was that about 81 to 90% of students return back to post secondary. So actually, that's a Canadian stat. There's a couple studies out there. Some of them say 81, some of them say 90, but it's very, very high in terms of the number of people that return back to post secondary after taking time off. And the higher the number, it's when they enroll in some sort of formal support programming that exists to help them. They're not just becoming a vagabond with no direction, but they're actually intentional about their time. So we know that that number is very, very high. Now, every parent is going to say, well, my kid is in that 19% that's not going to go back. And when I hear that, what I counter with is, did you know that 14% of first year students drop out of university? And
Uh,
so I think the message that I try and convey with that is that university or college education isn't for everyone. But if it is for you, you will make it there when the time is right for you. I also love to share stories of GAP students who didn't return to post secondary, and they're living their best life right now. They make more money than I do. They live independently. They have started their own businesses. They have become consultants on climate reform for large companies. They have sold their tech startups. They are doing incredibly well for themselves. So we do see really positive outcomes there. And then once they do return to post secondary, the GYA study showed that they actually have higher grades than their peers. So they graduate university with a higher GPA. We also know that they graduate in fewer years. So even though they took a year off and they're technically behind in one aspect by being behind 1 year, they actually go back with more certainty and more dedication to their studies. So they're not switching majors 6 or 7 times along the way. So it's a little bit of a leapfrog move where they kind of hold back and then they jump ahead of their peers. The study also shows that they are more involved on campus. So they get involved in leadership opportunities, extracurriculars, co curriculars, all of those elements. And then a Canadian study showed that they're actually more employable once they graduate because they have these alternative experiences on their resume. They've built up a network of potential employers on their gap year. So while people are scared that doing something unconventional might set them adrift, the studies and the facts actually prove the contrary.
Interesting. So if there are so many great outcomes for students that are taking gap years, would you recommend that everybody takes gap years, or what is sort of the typical persona of a student that would benefit or maybe not benefit from a gap year be?
Yeah, great question. So there are certain archetypes of young people that benefit from taking a gap year. We have like the traditional idea that we think of when we think of like a gap year. That's what we call the explorer. So they're somebody who recognizes that they want to see more of not necessarily the world, but they recognize that their experience being a high school student is a small ecosystem and they want to see more, whether that is traveling, whether that is exploring the world of employment or volunteering or being connected with different networks of people. So we've got the explorer. That's a common one. We have folks who are they have some sort of barrier in their life. We see a lot of this post COVID. So maybe they've got some anxiety, they've got some mental health challenges, maybe it's social anxiety, maybe it's an eating disorder. They have something else that's acting as a barrier in their life, and they want to take some time to learn how to manage that before adding on additional stress of post secondary. So that would be another archetype that we see. We call them the barrier breaker.
Hmm.
We got people with financial need, so we call them the savvy saver. So they don't necessarily have a bank account full of tens of thousands of dollars to pay for post-secondary and come out debt free at the end. So they're going to take the year to work full time and make money in order to offset the cost of post-secondary, or just to get ahead and come out with less debt out the other end. We see a lot of people who are burnt out, these high achievers that came out of high school with their 90% average. They were on student council, they were head of the basketball team, and they want to go into post secondary with that same enthusiasm and that same commitment to everything that they're doing. But maybe they need a little bit of time to recharge that battery. So we see a lot of that. And then we see folks who don't know what they want to study, don't know what they want to do for a career. So they're going to look and explore different options that are out there for them. So whether that is taking different internships or volunteering in different sectors, so that they know when they're going into post-secondary that they've chosen a career that they actually might enjoy. Like who knows what an engineer does, but everybody wants to get into engineering. When you might actually realize once you know what they do in real life, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to go in a different direction.
Everybody just wants the engineer money, but they're not sure if they'll love the path.
You got it.
Um, I hear a lot of kids talk about gap years, and the big criticism I hear is, how do you sort of pay for all of the travel or the activities that you want to do? So my question is, what activities would you recommend to students on their gap year, and how do you actually afford it?
Great question. First of all, gap years come in all sorts of budgets. So if you have $100,000, somebody will gladly take your $100,000 for your gap year, and you can sail around the world in a tall ship. You can fly all over the place, and that money can be very easily spent. If you have $0, you can also have a very, very meaningful gap year. So it's not necessarily about jet setting all over the world. It's about finding the right opportunities that meet your goals as well as your budget. And so no matter what you choose, it doesn't mean if you have more money, you're going to have a better gap year. That is not the case at all. It's about really understanding what your goals are and then finding the right activities within the right price point that is going to make your year work. So, for example, if you wanted to let's say learn French. Maybe that's a priority for you on your gap year. That's one of your goals. There are so many ways to achieve that goal. So if we're looking at the high end price point, you could go and do a language school in Paris for the entire year, and that's going to come with a high price tag. If you want to scale it back a little bit, maybe you want to become an au pair in France, where you live with a family and you earn money while being in France, but you're immersed in a French family for the year,
Interesting.
and you get your evenings and weekends. So you're offsetting that cost. If you want to go a little bit cheaper, within Canada, we are so lucky. We have incredible programs that are subsidized by the federal government. So, for example, the Kitimavik program, it's a 5-month program, 5 months for $1,000. That includes your room, your board, your travel, your volunteer placements. And you're in a house with 10 other Kitimavik participants, and some of them are Francophone, and you spend half your time in a Francophone community, half your time in an English community. So very, very accessible. We also have the Explore program, which is a 5-week immersion program somewhere in Canada, and again, covered by the government. And then if you want to go even cheaper still, go grab Duolingo on your phone and do those activities while you're working. So there really is, in every aspect, different price points that come along that can still help you achieve those goals. So it's not about how many dollars you have. And there's also scholarships out there right now. Every year, the Canadian Gap Year Association gives away $5,000 in gap year scholarships.
Wow.
Many times a year, RBC Future Launch gives away a scholarship for non-tuition skill building. So we've had lots of gappers get that $1,500 in order to take a trip somewhere or to buy photography equipment to start a photography business for themselves. So there's lots of different ways to make those dollars and cents connect.
That's really cool. So, if you know where to look, you can sort of get around the high price tags. And I guess
Yeah, and I
that's,
think that's one of the challenges is that when you jump into Google, everybody's first instinct is to type in gap year programs. And
mhm,
what you're going to see come up is the organizations who have a lot of money because their programs have high price tags.
yeah,
And so they're going to be the ones that come up with those top hits. But there is so many other ways. And I would suggest to you that 95 to 99% of gap year activities are not tagged in Google as gap year. So whether
right.
it's an internship or a volunteering or a course you want to take or like an exchange program, those are not necessarily gap year activities, even though it's going to make up the majority of what gap students do.
That makes total sense. The businesses that are getting like the highest value per customer are the ones that are gonna be promoted everywhere.
You got it.
Um, it's classic marketing. Speaking of marketing, though, I love yours.
Oh, thank you.
I saw you were using your Google Ad Grant. You were promoted right at the top of the
Mhm.
Google search results page. Your website is beautiful. Um, and I saw some of the like testimonial videos with your gap year students. There's one video that comes to mind. I forget the girl's name, but it's her trip to, I think, Asia,
Mhm.
on your page. It's amazing, the quality of the video she put together. It's a little like documentary with some soulful music and like, you know, um, reminiscence on life.
Mhm.
It's really good stuff. I'm curious, how did you set up your, I guess, your marketing? What's your sort of your philosophy towards promoting all of this?
Great question. So first of all, I have to give mad shout outs to Jazz. She is my partner in crime here. She is the marketing guru. So she has really upped our game in the last year and a bit. So I just want to make sure that we give her credit for all the work that
Absolutely.
she's
Shout out to
doing.
Jazz.
As well as our Gap Year ambassadors. So these are folks that we have come through our programs, and then we pay them to create content for us
Wow.
because there is no story. I can talk for hours about the value of a gap year, but in the end, that's my job. Is I'm paid to promote gap years. It's what I
Yeah.
believe, but the end of the day, I am considered to be selling a program or an idea, whereas our ambassadors are currently going through that or have just gone through their gap year, and them sharing their stories of transformation, of exploration, of failure, of what their life is like after their gap year. Those stories are so compelling and you can't argue with them. And we're just so lucky that we have such great relationships with those that take gap years and engage with us, that we can share their stories through our platform. So really, we're all about storytelling and making sure that that those stories get told, whether that's from the student perspective or the parent perspective or the educator perspective. We just need to do a lot of myth busting, stigma busting, and the best way to do that is through storytelling.
Yeah, and I think that's why your organization is so powerful, is because there is this stigma that's, you know, been around since who knows how long, 50 years plus, and it's not warranted, right? It's not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys are doing great work to sort of bring forward these stories of real success with your students who decide to take a gap year. Um, One thing I had to mention was, all of the testimonials were so strong. I wish they were on TikTok. I know you guys don't have a TikTok, but I wish you guys did. Um, I couldn't find it anywhere on your website if you do.
Yeah, no, that's the next thing that we're going to be tackling. It's a lot of maintenance to maintain all of these platforms, and one of our challenges is that all of our audiences sit in different platforms. So
Yeah.
we have our parents on Facebook still, we've got our educators on Twitter, we've got our post-secondary professionals in LinkedIn, we've got a lot of our youth in Instagram, and to be able to maintain all of these platforms and generate meaningful content
Hmm.
has been one of our biggest challenges. Is that's more than a full-time job to make sure that the content is targeted and relevant to each of the different platforms.
Right.
So we've been leaning into YouTube lately and making sure we've got lots of our stuff there, because we know that YouTube is a really strong search engine for a lot of Gen Z looking to find information. So we are heavily populating there. And one day we will step into the TikTok world. One day.
Now, if there's a curious parent or a student that's, well, it's a little late now, but maybe looking to take a gap year next year, where would you direct them? What event or resource would you show to them?
Yeah, I would say it's never too late. So if you are on your gap year now, or you're not in school this year, or you're in your first couple weeks of school and it's not feeling right, talk with your academic advisors. You can still push pause on that and step away, especially if it's relating to mental health. But if you are looking at it for future years, come out to one of our events. So if you're on a gap year this year, we have our Gap Year Frosh Week coming up, which is our biggest event of the year. We've got 200 gappers coming in, and we celebrate the kickoff to your gap year together, which is just a blast. If you're thinking about it for next year, we have got gap year expos that happen 3 times throughout the year. It's a great way to learn about how to plan it, how to budget it, as well as connect with different programs and opportunities that are out there that you might not know about. But I think probably the key is to book a call with myself or Jazz. We have free 30-minute consultation calls all the time that you can just come in and get some advice. What are your particular goals? And we can connect you with the resources that you need to kick off your year, or plan for next year, wherever you may be in that journey. We are here to support you.
Fantastic. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to speak with you and hear about all of the great work you're doing, and really educate myself a little bit more on the merits of a gap year.
Yeah, now you want to take one, I'm sure.
Oh, I wish I could go back. I kind of regret not doing that.
Yeah, I will tell you, the hindsight is 2020. So when I'm at in-person fairs, somebody will always come up to me. They might be 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, and they'll tap me on the shoulder and they'll say, Michelle, gap year was the best decision I ever made. It changed my life. And then I get equal amount of taps on the shoulder being like, man, I wish I had done that. That would have changed the trajectory of my life. And so if you're even considering it, come out and learn some more, because I want you to make an informed decision whether the gap year pathway is the right thing for you or not.
Amazing. Awesome. So everybody, check out the Canadian Gap Year Association. And is there any other social media that people should follow you on?
Yeah, you can find them all on our website at cangap.ca, or you can follow us on Instagram. That's where we're most active, and it's just CanGap Association. And we would love to see you on there, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The content there is absolute gold.
Amazing. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.